If any of us are really paying attention, we're always in school. I don't care how wise and how deep and how much you have to offer and how fiercely and inspiringly you can lead people towards something important and how much you've accomplished. If you're not attending the school of life and really curious to learn your next lessons, then you'll stifle something in the field. You won't really beckon forth the aliveness and the divinity of the people you interact with.
Hello, dear ones. I want to start by thanking our new patrons this week, Adroy Data, Christy Caudrill, Catherine Eels, Meredith Redding, and Fabian Fortmuller. We very much appreciate your support. I'm sure that those of you that listen regularly know that making this podcast takes a lot of time and energy. In fact, many of the most popular podcasts out there have full-time teams with multiple people working on them. It's now been over 2 years since we went on air, and we still don't have our core costs covered. Our team consists of Lucy White, who lovingly crafts the words that go with the podcast and does some of the social media, Mary Chan, who does the sound edits, and then me, who does everything else. Our patronage currently covers almost half of Lucy and Mary's fees each month. It would mean so much to me to be able to work on this with less pressure and stress, which means having our costs covered and having more time to seek out the most relevant guests and themes. And so I ask you, if you have learnt anything at all from this podcast or been inspired by something here, please head to our website, www.thefutureisbeautiful.co, and click on community and make a monthly donation. You will also receive access to our chat group and monthly video calls, which are lively and beautiful. And you will be supporting the sustainability of the show, as I want to keep doing it, but I'm also aware of my own energy levels and life stage. And for those of you that are wanting to integrate the wisdom from this podcast into your life with some guidance, support, and community, please come and join us in Presence Collective. For more information, click on courses on our website. In this conversation, we talk a little about the different meta-narratives of the future. I'm really interested next year for Balance to feature more of the innovators and techno-optimists. I've been hanging out with some here in LA and found out lots of interesting things that are being worked on, but are currently off the record. If you've come across or know of any great innovators working on world-changing solutions, please introduce us or write in and suggest names. Some of you might not know, but I used to be the co-founder of a tech startup in the innovation space, and it's a love of mine that I want to give more space to again, so that we can be inspired by those that are working hard behind closed doors, coming up with solutions that may just be our future. My guest today is Terry Patten, a philosopher, author, activist, social entrepreneur, consultant, coach, and the author of the groundbreaking book, A New Republic of the Heart, an Ethos for Revolutionaries. As an author, he co-wrote the book, Integral Life Practices, with Ken Wilber, Adam Leonard, and Marco Morelli, which distills ancient and modern practices into a contemporary transformative lifestyle. He's also authored 3 previous books and over 24 book chapters, magazine articles, and academic papers published in peer-reviewed journals. As a philosopher activist, Terry has been a leading voice for facing, examining, and healing our global crisis through the marriage of higher consciousness and activism. As a teacher and coach, he has introduced thousands of people to integral practice in person and over the web, where he created and taught online courses. As a community organizer, he founded and leads Bay Area Integral, which gathers and supports an integral community in the San Francisco Bay Area. As a social entrepreneur and consultant, Terry founded the pioneering conscious technology company, Tools for Exploration, led a team at the HeartMath Institute that developed their first heart rate variability monitor, and is currently involved in businesses engaged in restorative redwood forestry, developing fossil fuels alternatives, addressing collective trauma, and creating new currencies for a sustainable economy. After Terry and I sat down together for this interview in Marin County last month, we went together to a Michael Meade talk. He spoke a lot about liminal spaces, which feels like a potent way to describe where we are right now in the human story, at a threshold, a space of not knowing, standing on the answers, on the edge of transformation. Terry and I have been in touch for a little over a year now, and I find that Terry has a very clear, mystical and practical way of understanding and guiding us in this moment. We had a deep discussion about presence and the aliveness in all things, meta-narratives for the future, and finding our way to be an activist in the system, against the system, or around the system. We explore the question, how can we be the change that we want to see in the world? I hope that you enjoy this conversation and it opens up something for you. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Terry, I am absolutely delighted to be here with you in Marin, sitting down face to face to have this conversation. We had some communication a year ago, and because of the fires here, I didn't make it out here to spend time with you and others out here. I was really struck by your communication at that time and just the generosity and the kindness and the openness and the curiosity of it. And I want to mention that because it's actually kind of rare. I find that often people that are doing beautiful work also get so caught up in, finding their place in the world, and the ego can get a bit activated. And I just felt really seen and really welcomed by your generosity, and it really, really struck a chord with me. And I've noticed it seeing other interactions that you have, and it reminds me of this essence of community that's so important about this particular time that we're in, and what you share about how the Buddha said that, the next Buddha may show up in Sangha, in community. And so how we treat each other and how we give space to each other is such a key part of this moment in time.
Yeah, it sure is. And even though we all have some instincts and some beauty, I think most anyone listening to us undoubtedly has a good heart, and they bring kindness and are friends to one another as best they can be. I think it's quite something to internalize that we're living in a moment in which transformation, disruptive change is upon us, which means that what we know of friendship and what we know of community isn't going to be enough. We're being asked to a new level of human maturity as individuals, but especially a new level of relationship to one another. So the kind of kindness and generosity, blessing, it has to actually kind of catch fire. Our relationships, our relational exchanges tend to be, in conventional society, zero sum. You do something for me, I do something for you. I pay you, you do a service, that sort of thing.
Transactional nature.
Transactional. And we get to a place where there's some generosity, where I'm generous and I think that generosity will eventually, what goes around comes around. My friend Nipun Mehta, do you know
I do,
Nipun?
yes.
He has terms for each of these, but he talks, I think, ultimately about natural reciprocity, where you give because giving itself feeds you. And if we can get to a place in which we get really good at blessing each other, really good at being friends to one another, so that you go away from your encounter with me filled with light and love and strength and confidence and capacity, and then you go do that for somebody else, and that person does that for somebody else. That's actually, from a abstract analytical perspective, if we were to figure out how do we get out of this jam, that's almost absolutely required. So I think the circumstance that makes us students of, not just kindness or generosity, even friendship or community, all of them have within them potential. Like, we look at this stuck situation in which the tangle of karmas is like a Gordian knot, spaghetti tangle. You could never pull it apart. Where is the energy that could break this logjam? Where does it come from? Well, every time I go really, really deep with anyone, I discover a latent beauty or heroism or saintliness. I discover a kind of greatness that is wishing it could express itself. It tends to be a little bit latent. And so when I think of, like, where could the energy come from for this emergence that we all hope for, in evolutionary theory, emergence is when something comes into being that was completely unpredictable from what went before. Life from dead matter. Well, we need some miracles now. And we kind of need to make ourselves a channel through which that kind of miracle can come. It has a lot to do with love, but no simple formula, not the love we already know. Kind of is asking us all to be students of that. I'm so glad that you had that kind of experience of me. I am endeavoring to be that way as best I can, very imperfectly. And it might be that as we soften into the infinite depth of the present moment, we discover an awakeness, a divinity, a miraculous potential that surprises us. That would be my hope in this conversation, in every conversation I have, in every encounter I have, that there's a welcome for the miracle to emerge.
Beautiful. What comes to me as you share that is that it could be translated, especially through a new age lens, into meaning that we show up and, we're just really like, yes, I'm awesome, everything's good. And like in that kind of, high vibe way. So you impart the high vibes onto people. And I know that that's not what you're saying, but that sense of when we're real and when we're really connected to our complexity of the emotional sense of who we are and the story of who we are and the story of this time on the planet, that showing up with love, as long as it's honest to whatever is present in that moment, then it does open that space. And so it might be sadness or vulnerability or rage, or, as long as it's not directed exactly at the person in front of you, but it's shared because that's real, then I feel like that's when this space can open up for this kind of community and relationship that we're calling in for this time, where we don't have to pretend.
Yeah, that's right. It is good to be able to wash one another with love, but love bombing, can be a formula and a technique, and every moment is different. Sometimes what's important is to cut through the crap and confront, even fiercely. Sometimes what's important is just clear discernment and intelligence. Sometimes what's important is humility and curiosity. Each moment presents us with a unique opportunity, and it's a unique challenge. And you kind of have to be actually present and feel it and see it, notice what's here and what does it call from forth, from the soul. And then be willing to be a student of all these different virtues, so that sometimes I feel asked to be, the wise old speaker of the things I know, which is kind of the mode that your questions seem to be inviting from me right now. But in other moments, it's very important that I just not know, and I'd be youthful and playful and silly and able to be in joy. And in other moments, and many moments lately, it's true. It's really important that the broken heart that is present to all the pain and suffering, human and non-human, not just now, but to come, that broken heart be what shows up. And yet the human mechanism tends to contract, it tends toward habit, it tends to go to sleep. We tend to go to sleep. So we discover a truth, and then we try to use that truth to meet a moment that confuses us, that we don't understand. And we apply it as a formula. And then it isn't what is needed, even if it was absolutely true in some previous moment. So it's really an adventure. I mean, if any of us are really paying attention, we're always in school. I don't care how wise and how deep and how much you have to offer, and how fiercely and inspiringly you can lead people towards something important, and how much you've accomplished. If you're not attending the school of life and really curious to learn your next lessons, then you'll stifle something in the field, and you won't really beckon forth the aliveness and the divinity of the people you interact with.
It's interesting because as we're talking, what I feel is, I suppose I feel the difficulty of staying in that aliveness all the time. And I know in myself, I have moments, sometimes very expansive, long moments of that kind of presence in the world. And then so much of the time, there's the phone, and there's this and there's that, and there are these kind of, how am I going to get the money for the podcast? All these like things that keep kind of going around. And our world's become a very easy place to numb out if we want to. And that desire and commitment to be alive in every moment. It's a huge challenge in this life. And of course, it's the only thing worth living for.
Yes. It's interesting. I'm in a moment right now wherein the beauty and miracle and wonder of existence are reasserting themselves, and I'm feeling the expansiveness of this transformational opportunity that being alive is. But my work is probably most closely associated with my insistence on looking unflinchingly at the really scary and heartbreaking realities that are so hard for us to be with, and really hard for us to, that tend to just crush our spirit, that tend to make us shut down. My one-liner is, things are far too serious for us to lose our sense of humor. And I find that persisting in this work, teaching, talking, engaging, serving others, helping people be effective, spiritually inspired activists, I'm having to help them and myself go through a series of dark nights of the soul and a series of resurrections, and you might say even awakenings. That the deeper than your joy is a deeper heartbreak, and deeper than that devastation is an unreasonable happiness that has no cause. And deeper than that is a willingness to let your heart be pierced by the horror, and for you to become like a caring mother who rushes forward in the face of the suffering. Deeper than that is a profound acceptance of all that is, that knows that whatever is cannot, could not possibly be a problem.
Mm.
And no matter where I have arrived, when I think I've got it, that's when I'll shut down and screw up and offer a formulaic response to something. And you know, it's okay that we're always learning. It's okay that we screw up. We have to have a lot of self-compassion. Good God, nobody gets it right all the time. But I've been on the path for a really long time. And as sophisticated as things get, if I don't stay really willing to be like an innocent child discovering everything for the first time, something numbs out, something deadens. And I'm not true to the divine spirit that is really trying to find its way into the world through me.
Yeah, it's constant. And when I think of any of the moments where I felt that awakening sense, and then I felt like I had arrived somewhere, you know, especially when you're early on your path, you think that there's a destination. And then when I realized where I went to after that and what came through after that, it's always so humbling at how much expansion is possible, how much we can go through these cycles and we have no idea. And whenever we're at a point in a cycle where it seems impossible, that somehow we can find our way out into something else.
You mean that the path is infinitely full of surprises and new lessons and new opportunities? Is that mainly what you mean to point to?
Yeah, for sure. But the darkness is the way. And it certainly has been for me. I have never I see some of my friends, find this flow, and some of them really feel like they have it like 98% of the time. But on my journey, it's not been like that. And I find that I get pulled like deeper down the more I walk. And then that's beautiful. I mean, I was at Pioneers, and there was a lot around grief this year in the programming. There was a lot around ecofeminism and grief and rage. And then there was also a lot around the sacred masculine and unrepresented communities and people of color and Indigenous people. And it's been really interesting because what it has opened for me this week is a process actually around really connecting to my grandfather, who hadn't shown up before in my practices and in my experiences. And one night I came back to this house after Pioneers, and one of the beautiful women that live here, Bristol, was doing a ritual around connecting to an ancestor. And my grandfather showed me what it was like to live as a man in colonial India, and how it felt to be in a country where it had been taken over by another race. And it was like this lived experience that I had just for those 5 minutes. And this week has been unpacking that in all of these different ways, and then seeing how that's manifested in other family members and some of the complexities of my own character. And yeah, I didn't see that one coming. So it's like, and of course I've thought about that before, but then I have this experience that's so like real and raw and calls for this very deep process to actually understand what that means.
So you are coming into contact with your own legacy of the way your family soul has been shaped by this legacy of colonialism, and how your paradoxical relationship, in a way, of inheriting both the experience of oppression and some of the privileges of the colonizing culture, are now having to become conscious in a whole new way, and something is being metabolized that brings forward you.
And it's not to say that I haven't been in a process with that for many years, if not my whole life. But it's like this week something else opened, another doorway that was deeper and more intense than any of the doors have been before. Yeah, there's always more.
Yeah, that's right. The path goes on forever.
Yeah.
But it begins with every breath. So in that, being here with me, both of us endeavoring to have these conversations that really matter, conversations that can catalyze not just one another, but other people too. Conversations that get more tender or more ragged or more wild or something. What do you sense right now in your field? What is here that might want to be explored?
I feel like this particular part of this process, and maybe it connects to what we were talking about actually at the beginning about relationships, is that it's inviting me to not only look at myself, but to look at everyone else that I encounter with this deeper lens of history and the trauma of oppression, privilege, that we're all carrying different percentage mixes of, especially we're here in America, where everyone is touched by that.
Right.
Yeah, and then it connects to, I know, what you've been part of last week with the Collective Trauma Summit.
Yeah.
I didn't get to watch as much of it as I'd hoped. Being at Pioneers, there's only so much you can soak in one day, 1 week. That reminder of the trauma that we're all carrying and the collective trauma that we're all carrying, and how at this time there also feels like there is an unprecedented amount of open conversations happening between different groups, people with different history, people with different views. And so we are in a space of very deep and open healing.
Yes. It's interesting how quickly that either opens things up or closes everything down. And one of the things about trauma is that it shuts down the nervous system such that you literally lose your ability to cognize even what's happening sometimes. The whole being can be shut down through trauma. And yet, when you have perhaps the help, perhaps the support, or just the innate capacity, whatever it is in your case, to actually be with what seemed too terrible to feel, that which you had to shut down to. But when you find your way to feel and breathe and be with, the healing of the trauma becomes a doorway to transformation. So this conversation about the ugly underbelly, the way that virtually every woman has in one way or another been made a sex object or just been dominated by male energy, the way that every person of color has in one way or another, at least in this country, experienced some measure of having to stuff their experience and be seen as less than, and the way in which everybody has internalized it. How there's internalized racism in every African American person, not just the white people. How there is a legacy of the Native genocide that visits itself upon all of us, including those of us who are the descendants of the perpetrators. I worked pretty deeply with Thomas Hubel on that summit, and one of the things that I loved that Thomas had done just a few years before I met him over a decade ago was that he began to see, as he worked deeply with Germans, how profoundly blocked they were by the darkness of the legacy of the Holocaust. The perpetrator is traumatized, not just the victim. This legacy of trauma can't be undone when we point fingers at the other. It has to be an opening for our own healing. The problem we have right now with identity politics very often shuts down people like me because I'm older, white, and male. In some contexts, I'm not wanted, others should speak. I should be silent. I should listen, In some contexts, there's an association with a kind of guilt that would tend to shut me down. Now, I've explored this a lot. I actually went into my own genealogy, and I discovered that I'm half Jewish, but on my mother's side, my ancestors trace all the way back to the Pilgrims, came over in 1640 from England. And my great, 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 great sixth great grandfather was living on the western frontier, which is now a suburb of Boston. And it was just when the relations with the Indians were beginning to break down, the late 1600s, 1670 something, I think. And Indians came and slaughtered his family, his wife and most of the children. He was out on patrol with his 12-year-old son, who's my fifth great grandfather. And 3 years later, King Philip's War broke out. And King Philip's War is a horrible experience. It's the first white genocide of Indians. And it was the good Indians at the original American Thanksgiving, the Wampanoag, I think it is. And they killed everybody or sold whoever was left into slavery. It was a genocide. And it's known that my sixth great grandfather was a major in the militia. And another relative who did some other research heard somewhere said that he was known as an Indian fighter. So it's evident that my blood participated in that native genocide, which I had always only thought of as just a horror, something that if I was anything, I was a stand against that. That is exactly what I am not, exactly what I renounce, what I denounce, what I condemn. And yet, it's my own blood. I am the embodiment of it, many generations separated. And it doesn't do anyone, any native person, any good for me to collapse in guilt or shame or some confusion, for this to shut me down. How do I conduct the energy of life today in a way that is a genuine gift to those who are conducting the results or holding the streams of the victimization of that awful occurrence? I have to be curious to learn from them. I have to really be interested in their experience, and I have to trust the process of our lives, to trust this moment. I have to decide that although sometimes everything seems so wrong, as I see the climate science, as I see so many forms of ugliness, it's so easy for me to decide that this is wrong, this shouldn't be. I hate this. I don't want this to be. I have to make it different. How can I make a positive difference? There's something so deeply wrong. And yet in my deepest meditation, in my deepest work, I wake up to the fact that what is cannot by definition be a problem. This miracle of this life is expressing itself in this moment, as this moment. I can just be as beautiful an expression of it as I possibly can be. I can be curious to learn from you, to see the different flavor and texture of divinity that gazes back at me through this totally different, unique constellation of experience and intelligence and feeling. And I can notice that this has not just the peculiar uniqueness of Amisha, but it has the profundity of this unknowable divine, this divine nature that is beyond, everything we can say about God falls short of God. God is, and you are, an expression of that. And if I can see that, and somehow that divinity flows through you more because I am present, then maybe I begin to redeem some little piece of the ugliness that partly made it possible for my parents' parents to find their way through and for me to be here. So you know that Honopono, what is it? I love you.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Please forgive me.
Please forgive me. I forgive you.
Mm.
I forgive myself. And for me, my prayer also has thank you. And yes, I will do what's needed. I will be of service. I will make amends. I will do the good work I can. All of that, maybe evoking my greatest win would be if something in you was evoked that was somehow new or catalytic. You came alive in your divine nature more fully because of the way I was present to you. Like this magnification, this non-zero sum dynamic, this is a virtuous cycle, like a vicious cycle, but a virtuous cycle. I mean, I think we need a big, fat, general amnesty. We need to forgive everybody for everything because we can never, ever rebalance the scales. That doesn't mean that the people who are currently disadvantaged, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg says this great thing, yeah, I can forgive you, but take your foot off my neck. Like sometimes there's current oppression going on. So I don't mean to minimize that, but this blanket general amnesty, it's the beginning point for the healing.
Thank you for sharing this part of your story. And when you talk about this amnesty, I feel like it's acknowledging really this complexity that we are in and the complexity of the trauma as it's living out in us individually and collectively as a species. The complexity of living a life that is completely implicit in a system that we know is causing the problem. And just that acknowledgement that there aren't good guys and bad guys in the way that we'd hope, because then it's easier, right? You can choose a side.
Yeah.
Find your allies and go to war.
Yes. We want to do that. We want to make it simple. The complexity is itself maddening. So sometimes there's just a frustration. Like even this conversation is probably too much for many listeners because it's just holding so much paradox. It's like, oh, well, cut through it and just go for some definable goal and, make something in particular your objective and
3 top tips for living from the heart.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I began to feel just a physical revulsion to bourgeois spiritual culture at a certain point. It was as if we were trying to make one another feel good while we go numb and participate sleepwalking in a process that is destroying the very support structures that everything we love depends on. I wanted to just break through it. I didn't want to offer another healing or awakening or blessing, especially marketing it, Mm-hmm. What is the pain that your target audience is feeling? Try to speak to it, that kind of stuff.
I'm not good at that either.
No, I can't. It feels immoral to me because it feels as if I'm not speaking. I want to speak to that more curious and intelligent and beautiful. I like your title of your podcast, The Future is Beautiful. I want to speak to what's best in another person. I want to evoke what's best. And I want to let other people surprise me and make me discover something more, because we are not entities. We're processes. We're dynamic processes. And there is so much richness. Human nervous system is so sensitive. It's ridiculous. The Western scientific story is that the reason that astrology is universal in all the world's cultures is because we're all superstitious. So of course we would make up false stories. But what if you interpret it? The human nervous system is so sensitive, so exquisitely sensitive, that it can feel a play of larger forces in the subtle field that are affecting us in the natural world, such that in that ancient world, everyone knew exactly what phase of the moon it was, what time it was in the solar and the lunar cycle. And not only that, they were feeling all kinds of subtle changes that they then associated with the motions of the planets and all the rest. And that's why this was universal. And they noticed textures and qualities. And out of that came the stories and the archetypes and the myths, that actually they were sensitive to something. That's the sensitivity of our nervous systems. And with the bombardment of EMFs and TV and internet and this and that, we find ourselves shutting down to a narrower and narrower band and deadened to so much of what's there to feel. But once we practice, a lot of that reawakens. We're really resilient. The trauma shuts us down, the karma shuts us down, the narratives, all these things. We can blame a million things. And in this moment, there has never been the radiant, transcendental divinity of the heart more fully than this. God is here. The living God is this moment. Everything that anyone has ever praised or enjoyed or been grateful for or celebrated or worshipped. And of course, I'm not usually feeling all of that, but I keep waking up into it more and more. And to the degree that I do, this greater energy flows through me. And that energy, sometimes it expresses itself not in any predictable way. It's loving a lot of the time, but sometimes anger is the energy to change what needs to be changed. It expresses itself however it needs to. And we can unbend. We can open from those contractions and we can help one another. We have an enormous healing project here. And part of it involves changing our behavior. We do have to find ways to shrink our carbon footprints, change our actual lifestyles and behavior. We have to participate in mass actions that change systems and change policies and affect politics and government. It's not all spiritual. And yet it is all spiritual at the same time. All of that is. Because the energy, the consciousness with which anything, any form of excellence, any form of love, any form of efficacy, any form of mutual support, any form of empowering another person, all of that is an expression of this infinite depth that is always right here, always right now, and which is looking back at me through your eyes, which is knowing itself as each beat of each heart. And if I say, oh, I already know that, and I shut down that sense of wonder, I'm not being more hard-headed and smart. I'm living in an impoverished world. So reawakening myself and others to the mystery and the miracle is not something to look at as if it's an alternative to effective activism. I think it's intrinsic to it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I would love for you to share the way that you articulate it in your book, because you just lay it out in a very clear way. I know you spent a lot of time and consideration in order to take all of this complexity and all of this possibility into something that could be a guide for this time, and there is a guide for this time. So can you just share?
Sure. I call the book A New Republic of the Heart. It has a subtitle, An Ethos for Revolutionaries. There's another line printed on the cover that says, a guide to inner work for holistic change. So the book organizes itself around the theme of wholeness and fragmentation. We're living in a moment in which the evolutionary process, which has naturally speeded up and speeded up and speeded up, cosmic evolution becoming biological evolution, becoming cultural evolution, and going faster and faster and faster and faster, in our lifetimes has become self-evident. Nobody could watch evolution happening in a single lifetime until now. And we are here with an amazing view. In my lifetime, we put the Hubble telescope in orbit. We got the view of the 13.8 or so billion year history of this cosmos and the 3 billion year history of life on Earth. All of these things have come into view right as we seem to be careening toward the destruction of the life support systems. So to me, the essence of this is a question: how can I be the change that I want to see in the world? And how can I comprehend what's really happening here? So the book is divided into two parts. The first part is called Wholeness and Fragmentation, and it lays out a lot. The book is it's a rich and complex book. I call it a meta synthesis, because it's not, some books are about a single idea, and they have many illustrative stories and maybe scientific evidence, and there's reportage, and it clarifies and sometimes a very interesting idea. And that kind of book is really easy, but it doesn't say that much. Other books bring together a whole series of ideas to constellate a synthesis in which a whole aspect of reality comes into view. And I did something even more ambitious with this book. I felt that what was necessary is a meta-synthesis, that is, a synthesis of a series of syntheses. The book can't really be summarized quickly. There's a really deep journey, and I think that the careful reader discovers a clarification of so many paradoxes come into view, and you have a basis for holding both sides of them, such that you can come into a mature and a creative relationship to our moment. But to me, the big and wild question of this time is, how can I be true? Here I am, born as a middle-class person in the United States of America, which is so wasteful. It would take something like 43 planet Earths to support, nearly 8 billion people living like I do. I did the math, I think, and maybe I've cut my carbon footprint down a bit, so maybe it's only 28 Earths, but I am, I have met the enemy and he is me. And that's the same for you and everyone else I know.
And everyone that's listening to this.
Exactly. We know we want something different, and yet we are actively being the thing we want to see change. And this is kind of crazy making. There are all kinds of virtues and values that we can begin to cultivate that eat at the edges of it. But what's in store for us, if we're to really rise to the challenge of this time, is nonlinear, rapid social transformation. And the way that might build is like any asymptotic curve or parabolic curve. You've seen so many of those hockey stick graphs where things go along slight, you don't see much difference for a while, and then kaboom, there's an enormous transformation relatively quickly. Well, how can we build the elements of health and coherence in the midst of this crisis of fragmentation so that they might, at a certain point, reach some sort of critical mass, knit together, and we might actually enact fundamental redesign of virtually every aspect of human life? It seems unimaginable on many levels because we're not going to get through this just by coming up with some sort of free energy device. There's going to have to be a redesign of not just the energy systems, transportation systems, the obvious stuff, the food systems, but it's also then our diet and our way of relating to preparing food. Then it means the way we live, the way we share our living spaces, the way we socialize, what a valuable life is, what it is, how to deal with hardship, how we relate to death and disruption. Many people have become just completely convinced that we're headed for near-term societal collapse, and that the best thing we can do maybe is relocalize and learn gardening and mechanics and trades and have a lot of good tools and go back to the land and live a simpler life and persist with the most heart and humanity we can with a few friends as long as we can, but ultimately it's all going to disappear. And then there are narratives that are coming at us about techno-utopia of radical, and there are going to be utterly surprising technological innovations that will change the world. We don't know exactly what they are or how they'll constellate or how they will interpenetrate with these horrible negative extreme weather events, fires, and the social disruptions, the mass migrations, the political reactions, police states, the potentials for war and destruction, how those will interpenetrate then with biotech revolutions that'll help us actually plant the 1 trillion trees we need to gather and sequester the carbon that we want to pull out of the atmosphere. So much is going to happen that's so different from how we've lived. But it does absolutely implicate me. It absolutely implicates you. We will have to be human beings with the flexibility and courage and resourcefulness and generosity and willingness and intelligence to participate in a radical transformation of our whole way of being. And we're the ones that central casting sent. If you're here, nothing is wrong. This is the moment. You were born, and you are here. This is the gift. So, Amisha, central casting sent you, and you're asking these questions, and you're gathering people who are listening with you and who can appreciate the way you ask the questions. And in the midst of that, we get to have this conversation. And maybe in the process of speaking and listening, we can soften and open and awaken, and a little bit of what it is going to be like to be the people who can navigate this disruptive time of change in a beautiful way. Maybe that comes into being. Maybe that's what's actually happening right now. And maybe that divinity that is the very nature of the present moment is just ready to come through you and come through me as we contemplate this, and to come through everyone who hears this and resonates with it. Maybe the miracle is finding its way through all the time, and we'd best trust the process instead of being afraid of it. And maybe that's hard. And maybe we need to be compassionate to one another and help each other through it.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty. It's interesting, one of the things that comes up for me as somebody who is having a lot of conversations with different people, both on the podcast and in life in general, with various people that are very sure about what's happening. There's this thing that I'm experiencing in myself where I'm less sure than I've ever been about what's going to happen. And it's actually an amazing position to be in. I find it very freeing in a certain kind of way. I find that it's freeing me from reactivity.
Yes.
Is the main kind of beneficial part of this initiation. But it's also partly isolating me from some of my friends and community that are really going ho on like one of these meta-narratives, because I can't quite commit to one, because I guess the thing I'm the most committed to is that we don't know what's going to happen. And we have all of this information and we don't know exactly which bits of it are correct, even though it's science. Like it's a very confusing and complex pool of information and narratives and agendas that we're in. With that, one thing that I'm working through is knowing how to show up as an activist on the outer planes. So I'm coming from a place where I've been doing this for like 15 years, and sort of around the 11-year ago mark, got very, very into international development, sustainability, was doing a lot around the beginnings of sustainable fashion, because I felt like it was something that illustrated all of the issues that we had in something that we could all connect to, that we're all wearing clothes. And so for me, it became a place to put my energy into, because I could talk about it in a way that connected to people. And also there was so much advocacy work to do in all these different areas. Now we're at this time where 11 years ago, all I wanted was for the press to be covering this stuff more and more and more. And now here we are. We're in that moment where the press are covering it more and more. What's arising in me is this, like, I don't want climate change to be like the war on terror.
Right.
And part of me is feeling like it is.
Well, it's so good that we have this vast movement, that we have Greta Thunberg, that we have Extinction Rebellion, that we have 350.org, the Sunrise Movement, that we have finally a mobilization, because everybody was sleepwalking. And yet the problem is, the problem, here I've just been saying there's no problem. And yet, despite the fact that it's good that we're mobilizing and that we realize that we really do have to make radical changes very quickly, and that will only happen because people decide to, and we have to engage. What I find is that anytime I'm in conversation with somebody who feels very certain of something, the techno-optimist who is certain, or the collapsitarian who is certain, I look for the good in them. I look for the values that they hold, and I look for the intelligence in them. And I find the place where I can resonate with that person. Generally, I'll find some quality of opening, if possible. I'll give them, they'll teach me something, is what it amounts to. If I'm really curious about what's good and true and beautiful in them, then oftentimes there's a little bit of an opening. And I can bring my whole self, including, for me, maybe you noticed this, but one of the later chapters of my book, I identify that there are 3 really important conversations going on about the future of the human experiment. And one of them I characterize as the conversation among the innovators. So these would be the techno-optimists. These are people like Elon Musk and Larry Page and Bill Gates, but it would even include many of the rational folks like Sam Harris, for example, or John Mackey, or, they're innumerable. The public intellectuals that have the largest platforms are almost all of them in this category. They share modernist values, and rationality is the terms of discourse, and science and technology is how we're going to create the future in that model. And you know what? We're going to live into a future that is very significantly going to be, at least in part, created by the people having that conversation. They're determined to create the best future they know how, and they're going to affect the future, and their ideas are going to affect all of us. Then there's another conversation going on that I call the ecologists. And these are people who are absolutely certain that we are a life form in this Gaia living system who can only find its sanity in a sustainable and loving relationship to the whole living earth. And they look to indigenous wisdom and indigenous ways of knowing. And they also look to the deep truths of eco-psychology and ecofeminism. And there's all the practices of permaculture and eco-villages, and a lot of mythopoetic revival materials are resonant with this view. And these people are doing the deep work of grief and reconnection, and they're having an honest confrontation with big parts of the reality that we're all really living in, and there's much that I appreciate, and I do think that they are holding essential truths that cannot be escaped, that are going to be tent poles for whatever future we do live into. And then there are the conversations that I identify myself most with, which I call the conversations among the evolutionaries. And these are the conversations that are rooted in the great spiritual traditions, but as they are being reviewed and renewed, where we're looking at our very way of knowing, looking at our very way of seeing, looking at our very way of being, taking meta perspectives and questioning ourselves and involving ourselves in a process of ongoing transformation. And it tends to be that each of these conversations has certain agreements that define it. And you can't really cross the boundaries. So among the innovators, the sentiments of the ecologists look kind of retro-romantic and Luddite and kind of lame. And the ideas of the evolutionaries seem kind of new age, fuzzy-headed silliness. And to the ecologists, there's a kind of evil arrogance to the innovators. And there's an idealism that isn't grounded enough in the physicality of the world in the evolutionaries. And the evolutionaries can appreciate good things about both other groups, but they feel superior because they're more evolved and they can see all the perspectives. And therefore, they just wish the others would elevate. And in each case, there's a kind of ego that puts the others at a remove. And yet every one of those conversations will only realize what it is aiming at in a world that will have to account for the absolute truths that, I wouldn't say absolute truths, but the absolutely necessary and very real truths that are evolving in each of the others. In other words, in this crisis time, human intelligence is coming forward. Okay, if we're maybe going to extinct ourselves, let's bring our best intelligence forward. And it is coming forward. And it's constellating into conversations, but those conversations are tending to be insulated from one another. So one of my calls in my book is to sharpen and deepen each of those conversations enough that they can open into a cross conversation which is almost impossible because you will get excommunicated from each of these, particularly the ecological and the innovator churches, so to speak. You'll get excommunicated if you don't hold the party line that they hold. We're in a moment where we can bring our intelligence forward in a way that can maybe break through some of those things. Because every one of those people, no matter what they think they know, they're a feeling, multidimensional heart who cares, who loves, who has values. Nobody's beyond our reach completely. I mean, it is true. There are things worth calling out. I mean, there is such a thing as psychopathy. There is such a thing as malignant narcissism. There is such a thing as cynicism. There are things we do have to actually oppose. But those are patterns into which souls fall. This reification of evil, this us and them othering of the thing we see as diseased, this is not a skillful way to relate to the complexity, even though we all do tend to fall into it sometimes.
It's interesting because when you say these three camps, I find that I have a foot in each, yet in this body I only seem to have 2 feet. So I'm not sure how I'm doing that.
Your third metaphorical leg.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I find that because I've covered certain meta-narratives on this podcast, that people then want to put me there because I had a conversation with somebody that's really leading the conversation on one of those narratives.
Right.
And on a personal level, I'm just finding myself like really less in any of these narratives. If I was before, I am less so now. Because every time I talk to someone and I see their heart and I see that lighting up and I see that consciousness that knows what it knows or is expressing what it's expressing, I'm like, okay, cool, all right, I'll go to Mars with you. That's where we're going. And then I'm like, yeah, I'll come and live on the land. And, you know, like, I don't know if that makes me uncommitted, polyamorous in terms of the future. Although interestingly, not in terms of relationships on Earth. But, or if that's me just beginning to embrace the complexity of this time, because I don't know, because there's no roadmaps, because no one's written the book on this yet, because it would take 2 more years for that book to be on a shelf. I don't know, but this is what I feel. I'm like, okay, like, when I don't feel myself wanting to go and get arrested with red paint on my hands for Extinction Rebellion, or I don't feel like a strong, like, okay, I'm giving up like all of my belongings and I'm gonna go off the grid, when I decide to get on a plane, and partly with a like, oh, I want to talk to some of the Californian folk and find out what they're thinking about. And, you know, that includes these people that believe that there is this optimistic other possibility, you know, and because I see how it takes quite a while before certain innovations make their way into cultural daily life. And so I'm curious as to what's being created right now and where that might lead us. And yeah, I guess this is where I'm at the moment, and it feels both beautiful because I feel like there's this openness that I am holding right now to learning and curiosity, and with no fixed address of where I'm going. And then at the same time, there's this, I don't know, almost like, I feel a little bit of, do I actually feel it or do I think I feel it? It's an interesting question, I don't know. I feel like a little bit of shame in not being like gung-ho about Extinction Rebellion right now. Because, you know, I'm in England. I've been in England.
You were there when the mass actions were happening.
Yeah, and I spoke on the first Rebellion Day a year ago. And then I've actually not been in the country a lot during how things have moved. And then, interestingly, during these recent mass actions, I had a fever.
Oh.
So I went to a tiny bit, and it actually made me much sicker. And then I was really out for like the whole of the time. Yeah, I felt both the beauty of it, the togetherness. A lot of my clients, community, friends, colleagues are really involved in it.
Right.
And at the same time, there's something in me that can't commit fully to that narrative.
Right.
And therefore can't show up fully in the way that I feel they are.
You know, I'm glad that you feel at home enough in yourself that you can just be honest about your experience and even your little bit of whatever shame or guilt around it. I'd like to suggest a real funny paradox. Like, you know, a lot of my work has been done in the context of the integral community around Ken Wilber's writings, where, you know, I've written a book with him, and many friends who are very influenced by that way of thinking. And the integral model attempts to see all these perspectives and bring them all together in a single comprehensive model. And I've come to feel that it's very, very, very valuable. I continue to be an integralist in many ways. I'm not renouncing it exactly. But I don't think it's possible to stand in one place and see everything. I think that every perspective, if it's even a classic saying of integral philosophy, every perspective is both true and partial. I can see your face from where I sit very, very well, but I can't see the freeway. I can't see, there's much I can't see. And even the integral view has been compared to an eagle-eye view or the view from 50,000 feet. And so it may take in a tremendous amount of territory, but it can't get down close and smell what the mouse can smell. It can't see what's under the trees. It can't burrow under the ground. In other words, every perspective will confer some clarity and will miss some. It also then means, though, that it's only when I completely take on the lens of science that I can have certain breakthroughs and insights that have changed the world, right? So you've got to take it very seriously. You've got to, at certain times, put on that lens if you want to see what it can show. And you have to commit to what can be seen in that way, as if it were the truth, as if it were the only truth, at least temporarily. Now, then you can step back from that. You can look through a different lens and you'll see another truth, which is radically true. So I think that from a certain perspective, we really needed Extinction Rebellion. I celebrate Extinction Rebellion. If I had the ability to do all the things that are important, I would be putting my body on the line for Extinction Rebellion energetically and gratefully. But is it the answer to everything? Hardly. In my book, I identify three as a very, very simple taxonomy of activism. I call it in the system activism, against the system activism, and around the system activism. Well, Extinction Rebellion is a form of protest. It's against the system activism. And it serves a really important purpose because it puts something super important on the public agenda, and it forces it through the acts of civil disobedience and shutting down the bridges or the public transport or whatever it's doing. On the other hand, you're not going to change society just with against the system activism. And it's much, much harder to constructively make the changes, the structural systemic changes that are necessary. And that is in the ugly, messed up, compromised world of in the system activism. You actually have to elect better people to make decisions. And no, that will never contain the nuance and complexity and richness of view that this conversation has included. It will never be a field for the fullness of our spiritual vision and the depths of our hearts and all that kind of stuff. No, not even close. On the other hand, I think it's a moral obligation to vote, cast your vote, participate, because the system affects a lot. So I think that that kind of activism is necessary and valid. Sometimes marching and protesting is valid. But most of my activism, as yours is around the system. If you educate girls in the third world, you change the world, but you didn't do anything in the system or against the system. If you bring forth a new technology that's going to make fossil fuels obsolete and uncompetitive, you'll transform the world, but you're not working in the system or against the system. If you help bring about a new level of conversation and culture, a new worldview, a new way of being human, you could transform the whole world without ever addressing the system, in the system or against it. So most of what we're doing is innovating that kind of transformation. We need a whole new human pattern. By trusting your heart intuition and your vulnerability and shining your soul and saying, no, my soul there's something I trust about my own experience, and communicating about it vulnerably with people who care intelligently and drawing others into that conversation. This is worthwhile. You're trusting that. You're working around the system, but you're shining your light in a way that's affecting others. You're an activist in that sense. That's valuable. Now, is that enough? No, nothing any of us is doing is enough. every one of us is under the pressure of an evolutionary moment that requires radical, rapid transformation. And nobody has completely unlocked the code for making that happen, or we would all be participating in it right now. But Extinction Rebellion is playing a very valid part in that totality. I'm grateful for it. So the not knowing that you're expressing it's an expression of your spirit's unwillingness to be pinned down in the static pretense of knowing, because something is still dynamic. So I think that's really healthy. But it would also be a diminishment of your dynamism to just stay in the I don't know. In a way, this is like a Japanese koan, an impossible question. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Show me your original face, the one you had before your parents were born. Be the change, be the wholeness. Restore a way of being human on this planet that is sustainable into the future. Be that change right now. You don't know how to do that, but life is asking you to do that. Life is insisting that you do that. Living under that pressure, it's an impossible question. Well, koans change the Zen monk's consciousness. That's how they find their way to Satori. Well, right now, we are being given a koan by life that's going to change our consciousness, and we're going to find our way to something new, a different way of being. And maybe we die along the way, or maybe we actually enact something amazing. All of it's possible. At times, you're going to have to act like you know something in order to act. You always be paralyzed in, well, I don't know, and never act. Action is single. Consciousness holds multitudes. Action, you have to do this and not that. I have to vote for this candidate and not for that candidate. I'm going to vote for this imperfect candidate and not that one. And I'm going to say I believe in that. I'm going to work for that one. I'm going to donate money. I'm going to go out and ring doorbells. I'm going to make something happen. Action is always single. It's always limited. But to not act is to abdicate responsibility. So you're in the paradox that's going to draw you through your unknowing, through your refusal to be pinned down like a butterfly with a pin through its abdomen. You're not going to be fixed, but in your dynamism, be dynamic enough to sometimes make a choice and be single and opt as if you did know. Both are possible. You don't eternally get rigidified into that one posture just because you choose it in a particular context. And we're going to have to all get good at that, and good at forgiving and joining with others who are dynamic processes, who are learning how to do this together.
Yeah, I feel that. And I want to clarify that my not knowing doesn't lead to inaction. I guess what I'm experiencing is that when I was younger, I've done all kinds of activism, from going to Georgia on the Kerry campaign and knocking on doors saying, "Hi, will you be voting for John Kerry?" Having guns pointed at me. I don't know, shaving my head to raise awareness for women in war zones who have their heads forcibly shaved. I've done all kinds of things, and everything I've done, especially when I was younger, I showed up to with this, like, how are we letting this happen? So much commitment and force of energy and pain. Yeah, just like, how can this be? And what has happened for me is that as I have delved deeper into my spiritual practices, as I've delved deeper into complexity, as I've stopped looking for the one way to be, the one answer, the one anything, as I've embraced more of my privilege and my oppression and the unique ways that my trauma plays out in the world, and the unique ways that I'm able to lift other people out of their trauma while still carrying some of my own, like I just keep understanding the deeper layers of our complexity.
Mm.
And it's like everything that I was taught when I was younger isn't true, in that you get to a place where you're a leader. Like you get to a place where you're ready to hold space for other people, and you have nothing, you've done your work. Like all of these things, they're not true, any of them.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to stay alive, right? If we want to stay dynamic. And so the reason that Extinction Rebellion has felt confronting to me is because I do think it's amazing. I think that what they have done in a short space of time is incredible. The atmosphere when you go to those events is like no other protest type event that I've ever been to. And this is in London, which is not the most heart-centered capital of the world.
Right.
And it is different. And when I went to the very, very first event for Extinction Rebellion, I was moved by that instantly. And that first rebellion day I went to, and I was just like, whoa. And then life took me out of the country. And then, I got this fever this time around. But as I've seen more and more of everyone I know, I'd say 80% of everyone I know, in terms of, because it's kind of like, if you care about the world, if you are in touch with your heart, if you're spiritual, then like you have to be part of the rebellion.
Right.
Then I've done my reading and I've seen some murky things potentially about where some of the funding's coming from. I've read some interesting things about some ulterior motives that may exist because everything's complex.
Right.
And that doesn't take away from the purity of the intention and the need for what's happening. They ask this question. It's not, it's like, are you willing to be arrested and put your life on the line for this? And it's been interesting talking to some of the people that have been arrested and how they feel about that as an after effect.
What have you observed? A
lot of fear, like that kind of bravery that, I'm going to do this. And then they're like, oh, what have I done? I mean, and then of course, I haven't actually yet spoken to somebody that's like really, really committed to like that particular path of being arrested and serving full imprisonment.
Period in jail.
Yeah, so I want to delve more into that conversation, and hopefully I will over time with other people through the podcast, hopefully. I guess I feel like I can't put myself completely behind that because I can see all of these other possibilities and these complexities of what might be possible. So it's not like I can't show up to a action for Extinction Rebellion. Because I can and I have and I will and I'll keep doing that. But it's like, I found it confronting to have an opinion that feels kind of real to me, that is in conflict with the popular narrative of our time, if you care about this stuff.
Right. Well, this is the thing. When your own peer group gets mobilized, then a kind of conformity and groupthink begins to arrive. And something about that is beautiful. We're all on the same team. We're all having the same party. We are doing this. And we want that. We want to mobilize international, multi-generational movement that is absolutely dedicated toward a transformation of human culture that causes us to live in harmony with our environment and to really address the ecological predicament. And the closest thing we have to it right now is Extinction Rebellion, because it has so many beautiful sensitivities and awarenesses built into it and woven into its DNA. And yet it will fail us, like every movement has ever. I participated in civil rights and peace movement marches. And at a certain point, the form becomes sort of a dry husk. We're going to have to live into being human differently, and nobody knows exactly how to do that. And so we need to engage in protest, and we need to elect better leaders. We need to do all those things. We need to innovate new eco-villages, and yet we're gonna meet again in another moment, Amisha, at another moment. This process will have turned, the wheel will have turned. And anything that we thought was the answer will be shown to be part of a more complex process that is leading us to another set of challenges and another set of opportunities. So this conversation isn't really ever going to end. And the candor and curiosity and vulnerability of being willing to put out your ambivalence about the movement that has captured your peer group is a gift to anyone who would otherwise be captured and forced into a kind of conformity. So I celebrate that. I can see that we've spoken for as long as we had said we would allow. So we're maybe here coming to the end of our conversation, but I like that we're talking about how it has to continue some other time. We don't exhaust these topics.
These conversations are never over. They're always alive.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll post links to everything that's been mentioned, but do you want to just share about your book and where to find it?
Well, my book is called A New Republic of the Heart, an Ethos for Revolutionaries. It's published by North Atlantic Press. And my website is terrypatten.com, and there's a new nonprofit that's come into being around my work called newrepublicoftheheart.org. And we're just launching a podcast, Dispatches from a New Republic of the Heart. And I hope people will resonate with aspects of what I've said and check these things out. I invite everyone to do so.
Thank you. I'm sure they will. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, totally. Thank you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question. How will you create beauty in the world?